Welcome, everyone. I just want to let you know that we'll be starting in about 1 or 2 minutes as we let some other people join in. Welcome, everyone, to the SciencePOD webinar, How to Succeed with Content Marketing. We're very excited to have everyone here. This is the first webinar that SciencePOD is hosting in a series of webinars. And to introduce myself, my name is Melina Papadopoulos. I'm a marketing expert and a partner with SciencePOD. And I'm going to serve as the moderator today. I will also have the pleasure of introducing Sabine Louette, who is the CEO and co-founder of SciencePOD. And Sabine is a media entrepreneur, science communicator, and journalist. And she has over 20 years of experience in the science and technology publishing area. And she founded SciencePOD back in 2014. And the last thing I want to say before I hand over the reins to Sabine as our key presenter today is if any of you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to pose them in the questions bar. We're going to reserve 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the webinar to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Melina, for this great introduction. So I'm going to start now. I think we have a great attendance today. Thank you so much to all of you to attend. We're excited to present you this first webinar. So the basis of the discussion today would be about anyone who's a professional involved in communication routinely needs to organize campaigns. And although content marketing is primarily designed for marketing purposes, some of the techniques that we're going to be presenting today can be also used for educational and informational purposes. So bear with me, and I'll be very happy to answer any of the questions you may have at the end. So feel free to use the tools. Before we start, I'd like to set the scene, because at SciencePOD, we're a content creation company and platform. And what this means is that we're expert storytellers. And any good story always starts by setting the scene, putting a bit of context around the activities that we're doing. So first of all, I'd like to give context that's relevant to the science publishing industry. This particular webinar is aimed at science publishers and people in related organizations, but obviously some of you are from other industries, so I'm conscious of that. The important shift that has happened in the science publishing industry recently is linked to the advent of the open access business model, as you all know. And what this has done when it comes to communicating around science publishing is that it's shifted the way people market their scientific journal or medical journals towards more author-led marketing and away from journal-led marketing. So this actually influences a lot the activities that some of our publishers, clients are doing. But a lot of the lessons also apply beyond this industry. The second trend that's changing and shaping the way people communicate nowadays is the fact that increasingly people funding research, particularly when they come from the public sector, government, or when they come from the charitable sector, they have expectations that we explain, or the scientists explain, what the funds have been used for, and so that the wider audiences, wider public, but also policymakers and other people involved in this knowledge ecosystem can also benefit from those findings and become aware of the outcome of the research. The third trend is a very particular one, because you've all experienced it firsthand in the past few months, particularly with the pandemic. We're all operating in the context where fake news and misinformation are prevalent. And the issue with fake news is the way they tend to be written and expressed. They always contain a higher level of certainty than anyone from a scientific or medical background might write or express. And this unfortunate state of affair means that misinformation tends to travel much faster, 6 times faster than anything based on facts. But also, there's a study of Twitter rumors recently in the journal Nature that showed that the fake news or misinformation would reach up to 100,000 people. And by comparison, any fact-based information would just about reach 1,000 people. So it's a factor of 100, which is tremendous. The fourth trend that's really affecting the way people are operating is the fact that we're in a society where everything is always on. So communicating online means that anyone putting out information out there would always need more content to be created in less time. And yet, because a lot of you are coming from highly regulated industry or from the science publishing industry where facts and accuracy are paramount, there is no compromising on quality. So all these factors are shaping the way people communicating nowadays through content marketing are operating. So let's now focus a little bit on the nature of the content that we're specialized in, evidence-based content. And in order to give you a real sense as to what we mean by evidence-based content, I'm just going to give you a short definition of what we mean by that. There are several criteria that help shape evidence-based content. It would be digital stories, whether they're in text, audio, video, visual format, but they have 4 things in common. They'll be based on best available evidence, typically from the scientific literature or the medical literature. They will also be based on the work of scientists with the right expertise for the topic. And you've all witnessed during the pandemic how there was a battle of experts in relation to the diagnosis, the treatment of the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is all very current. And also any form of evidence-based content would need to clearly identify the source of the content information. This is obviously important when you're a source yourself. If you're a publisher, you need to be recognized as the source of evidence-based and reliable information. And finally, evidence-based content of the type that is being used for content marketing needs to be suitably addressed at the right level for the audience you're trying to target. So these are all the factors to take into account when starting out to produce evidence-based content for content marketing and other purposes. Now, this is my favorite point in this presentation is I'd like to take you back a little bit in history and remind you of the work of a mathematician called Claude Shannon. You might have heard of him because he's the father of information theory. And what he did back then is to study what does it take for information to travel from a sender to a receiver with a little bit of noise in the middle along the way. And he was analyzing, what makes it effective, essentially. And he did an awful lot of work on that topic, but there was one particular aspect that I thought is really worth sharing in this instance, is that for information to travel from A to B effectively, it needs to be redundant. And when you think of it, when we write things in the written language, we tend to use this redundancy ourselves naturally, in that very often in a written sentence, you would have words of the same meaning that are together in that same sentence. So this is an element of redundancy that makes the communication more effective. And this is a very important factor to bear in mind in any content marketing activity you may do. Now, we're going to really plunge in the heart of the topic, and I'm going to guide you through this very conical information infographic, in that it will give you a sense of the steps that are involved in order to get to the point where you effectively convey your message and you get your return on investment. So I'm going to dissect this pyramid in a very step-by-step manner. First things first, let's look at the reason why people would want to engage in content marketing. And the figures I'm giving you here on the screen are related to a particular survey done for organizations involved in B2B in the US. But I think the answers to this survey actually can extend beyond that particular audience, in that a lot of you would want to do content marketing to raise the awareness of your brands, and also to cultivate the loyalty of your target audience. And of course, the other reasons why people do content marketing, such as lead generation, sales, and so on, are also very good reasons for engaging with it. But they are a combination of reasons why people engage in these sort of activities. So let's go back to our pyramid. And the basis of our pyramid is really what will be the basis of your own work in terms of content marketing. It all starts with a strategy. There's no avoiding this. You need to define whether your purpose is to market something, to inform your target audience, or to educate them. Once you've positioned yourselves as to what you're trying to achieve, you can typically only convey one key message for every of the campaign that you actually carry out. So this is worth remembering as a sort of baseline to your activity. And I cannot emphasize enough the need to plan ahead, because planning is really the secret of any good content marketing activity. You need to put yourself 3 months, 6 months, 12 months ahead. You need to project your activities in order to have the time to organize all the content and all the distribution that are required to effectively communicate. And this is probably the part of the content marketing success that's the most critical. Now, let's move on to the content itself. Like Shannon discovered, for your message to be effectively communicated, it needs to be expressed in multiple formats and conveyed in multiple ways. And that's, when you look at human psychology, it's because some people are more visual, some people like to hear things, people have different habits. They like to consume content on their phone or by email or on social media. So you need to cater for the needs of the many different kind of people you have in your target audiences. And that can be done by distilling your key message in the form of multiple formats, as I've shown in this slide. In order to get to the point where you can create multiple formats, clearly you need to create that content. And a lot of our clients come to us and say, oh yes, I need a copywriter to create my content. And that's true, you know, they're completely right. And what often people don't realize is that it doesn't just take a writer to create a piece of content. It takes a lot of work, and that work is represented on this diagram that you see here on the screen. And essentially what this shows is that 30% of the work is actually in editorial management of the entire process. You know, it takes a lot of effort and brain waves to develop a brief that's consistent with the ideas you're trying to convey. And also when we work with publishers in particular, very often they have their own primary sources of content that our team would typically curate to find stories that are worth telling. So stories that are likely to be more attractive to wider audiences. And that step, which represents 10% of the overall in red here on the graph, is quite an essential step before even you start writing and then doing the quality control, which is when the editing and the proofreading happens, all the way to the polishing for the piece to be ready to export. So that gives you an idea about the complexity of creating a single piece of content, let alone multiple versions of that piece in multiple formats. So it's an important factor to take into account. Now, you also need the talent. I mean, we're specializing ourselves in connecting on our platform a global community of 500 science and medical writers. Typically, these people would have a medical degree, a science degree, or a PhD. And on top of that, they would have had experience working for publishers or for the media. So they have that quite unusual set of skills that makes them storytellers. And this is what's required to create quality content for your content marketing. Once you have done the content, created the content, then you can think about distribution. And of course, content would then be tailored to particular channels when it comes to video or podcast or things like that. But that's one of the constraints of distribution. But you have other type of constraint when it comes to distribution. It's to do with advertising the content so that it's seen by more people. And of course, in this distribution stage of the content marketing cycle, what really matters to people is being able to measure. And that's why in our day and age, where there's so many tools, so many types of analytical resources, marketers have become really king at interpreting these sort of KPIs, analytics from all sorts of measurement solution. And very often there is a tendency to forget that in order to get good results in the analytics, you still need to have quality content to start with. The next step in the process then is the result of all these efforts to put together a key message, to express it through multiple formats, and then to distribute it. Ultimately, this will lead to engagement if your content is good enough in terms of quality, because people cannot be forced to share. You can only get them to share if it's interesting content. So this is your responsibility to make the content interesting so that your audience will engage with it. And naturally, this will bring you a return on investment. The combination of all these steps together will give you a return on your investment, because then you would have achieved, you know, higher profile, more interaction towards selling or towards loyalty, growing your loyal members, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of upside to this sort of approach, but it's a long-term approach. And if you look at the big picture, you can see this diagram was purposefully designed as a pyramid because it really shows how important the content is as a foundation of any of these content marketing activity for your communication campaigns. If you try and remove that orange layers with the content, you can spend all the money you want in content distribution. You're going to be wasting your money because that foundation layer will not be there. And when you think about how you apportion your budget, it's very important that you keep in mind that that pyramid shape. It's the same with the food pyramid. You know, when you create your meal, you have to make sure you balance the carbs with the vegetables, the fat, and so on and so forth. There's a real similarity in that. Now, I've talked to you a lot about the theory of content marketing and how it works. Now I'm going to give you a few examples. So those examples are taken from our experience in the science publishing industry and medical publishing industry, but obviously what we're doing can also be used for any organization involved in knowledge creation. So for publishers, what matters is to make their authors shine. And to do that, typically what we do is we translate those complex studies that the scientists have published into clear, concise, and compelling stories that are easy to share. This is one example. This was a 300-word summary of a study on Bitcoin. Of course, the topic is very, you know, very à la mode. It's very fashionable. And this particular scientist was over the moon to see that after the piece was distributed through a specialist channel called Alpha Galileo, which really connects with science, professional science journalists, it really triggered a lot of buzz around his own work. And you can see the content, which was made available for free, traveled far and wide on the internet and was even translated by some people. And the scientists couldn't be happier. We have another example of impact of similar stories. Again, you take a research study or clinical study, you turn it into, you know, a summary that's easy to digest. Again, this was distributed through Alpha Galileo, again, targeting the media. And one journalist at the New York Times picked it up and then covered the story. It was all in the timing. The story was released in December. It was very, very timely, but the content really helped, and the fact that there was such a beautiful picture to go along also made a difference. Now, just to give you a sense of ROI, typically what we've experienced with the content that we've created for a lot of publishers is a typical increase on the number of downloads by 30%. When it comes to video content, it can even go up to 80% because people are very visual, and there's also that tendency that people want to watch video rather than read text. That hasn't changed. But for a typical piece of content that we would produce, we have experienced up to 12,000 clicks, you know, individual people wanting to read about that. And those figures come from highly specialized topics areas, such as physics or biomedical sciences, which are not always easily digestible. So to get this sort of number for something that so specialized is actually quite an achievement, and the publishers were very happy about it. Now, sometimes you also need to read it in the words of, you know, people who have tried it. And this is an example of, you know, one of our clients who had really seen the impact in terms of visibility and attracting interest to their own publication. But there's many more of these testimonials. And I would like to invite you to read our blog as well to just understand the mechanic of how this content marketing is changing the way our industry is changing. So now one question that people really often ask is, what format do I need to use for what particular purpose? And that really is where we can share a lot of our expertise. So typically, this is an example of a case study of how a scientist was able to successfully extract information from a database. So this really, for people who are very technical products, very complex products such as databases, they're not easy to communicate about. So that's why extracting single case studies of how people have made use of it was one of the ways we addressed the communication challenge. Now, a lot of our clients would also be based book publishers, and you don't have enough hours in the day to read the full book. So that's where book reviews come in handy. And again, if they're well written, quality control, written by professionals, not by students, they are actually highly shareable and very effective. We also produce an awful lot of these news stories. So they're written in a journalistic style, but they're all quality control. So they're based on actual research studies, and we always double check that we interpreted the author's information accurately. Sometimes an image is worth 1,000 words. That's why, for also based on the single study, it's more effective to use imaging. And when you have enough of these images and text, short journalistic text, you essentially have enough content to create an entire online magazine or a specialist webpage that really showcases the best of your primary source of content or primary, clinical research. Some people who are very active on content marketing also sometimes want to provide their target audiences much more in-depth reading, and that's why we've also got experience of producing ebooks or white papers, because these are much more suited to satisfy the appetite of people when you want to convey much more complex concepts. Now, I always include this slide in my presentations because we all communicate in English. That's our common language. It's not always our mother tongue, but we cannot forget that some people do not want to read just in English. They want to read in other languages, and we've experimented with the Chinese content recently, and we were delighted that we were able to prove that it's all about the process. And this piece of content was actually the first we generated in Chinese language, and it really showed that our editorial processes were robust enough, and so that when you associated a team of writer, editor, proofreader who are Chinese speakers, you can still reproduce the same as what we had been able to do in English at the same level of quality, because our processes were sufficiently robust and managed through our platform. I love this section of the presentation in that now we've talked about different format for different purpose. Every single organization has their own challenges. When it comes to publishers, the challenges come to convey about the uniqueness of the research they publish or the excitement of the books they publish. But when it comes to more industry organizations such as pharma company or biotech companies, sometimes it's more about conveying the innovation, the very intense innovative solution that they come up with. In order to convey more of these sort of messages, we know from a human psychology study that focusing on people always wins. And if you see online, having Q&A interviews, focus on a particular topic, having profiles of people who are really, where the readers can really sort of engage with what the scientist has done, are also very effective way of communicating. We've done work which are more events-based, like this particular Q&A interview, but also podcast works really, really well, and it's a different way of communicating that suits some people better. I know not many people are commuting anymore, but people always find a quiet time to listen to podcasts, maybe in the evening or on their lunch break. So this is a very good format, and the same with video. So we've had that unique opportunity to cover the work of some academic expert on teaching during the lockdown, and they gave us an interview on how to teach during lockdown, homeschooling, and what are the challenge. And this was a fascinating and very timely piece of content that we had the chance to produce. So all in all, I'm coming to the end of my presentation now. I would like to conclude by saying that really evidence-based content helps taking complex information out of its silo, making it available to wider audiences. And this is the quality of the story itself that's going to make the success of your content marketing campaign. And with these good words, I would like to give you a contact email if you have questions, but we might also take questions from the floor.
Great. Thank you, Sabine. Yeah, a few questions have come through. One in particular that I see is the pricing model for SciencePOD. What is the SciencePOD pricing model?
Very good question. So we have realized that people do not always have a fairly good idea about how much content they're going to need for the next 12 months, or exactly, what kind of pieces they need. So we tend to price per piece, but we basically sell bundles of content for the next 3 months, 6 months, of 12 months, so that we give maximum flexibility. We've got a system of credit, which means you just need to purchase a certain amount of credit that's really more or less correspond to the estimate of the amount of content you think you're going to need, and then you can redeem this credit against particular types of format, whether it's audio, video, or text.
And I think related to that is actually a question of how frequently do you suggest that content is posted?
So that's a very important,
or published, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's a very important question, because how much is enough? It really depends on the target audience that you have. We all bombarded every day by stories coming from food companies or fashion companies. I think once you're a bit more removed from these sort of industries, you cannot bombard your audiences as frequently as that. But I would say, when it comes to having a blog, for instance, once a week is very reasonable and also very manageable from your own perspective, because if you need to meet that deadline of every week being able to post something, that means your pipeline of content will need to be organized weeks and weeks in advance.
Indeed, yes. And another question that just came through is the content that SciencePOD that you work with, is it your own content?
Well, it is our own content in the sense that we create it, but the source of the content belongs to whoever has done the primary study or the technical report from which we get inspiration. And then, of course, the content then gets passed on to the client for them to do whatever they want with it. Typically, our clients would spread the content through their own website because they have their own analytics already set up. But some of these smaller clients are quite happy for us to distribute it on their behalf through our social media network and other distribution channels, such as the one I was referring to earlier that targets the media, Alpha Galileo.
Okay, we just had another question come through. I think this one's a bit interesting because you can take it from multiple perspectives. Do you suggest any specific platform to do science content marketing? I mean, and I think what's meant here, B2B or something similar, another kind of content marketing platform.
Okay, so I assume that question is about distribution.
I imagine so. Yeah, it's a little bit unclear to me too, but let's take that perspective. And
okay, so
feel free to clarify.
There's a lot of automated digital content marketing platform out there. I think Gartner did a comparative study for these B2B digital content marketing platforms. So you can always consult these sort of studies. I don't want to name any names because I don't think some are better than others. I think they all have different functionalities and different options. But all in all, what these things do is they make sure they connect to your target audience with your content in an orderly manner, in the way that you have a record of who opens that content, who accesses the content, how frequently, what time of the day, and so on and so forth. So this question really is about trial and error. So making sure you're effective in your B2B content marketing requires to do quite a lot of campaigns initially until you realize who is picking up your message, and also helping you refine the message as you progress over time.
Okay, good. We have a few more that have come through. What format works best with editors? Emails, LinkedIn, Twitter?
That's a very good one. There was a study a few years ago done by Nature of scientists and what scientists are consuming best. So if you want to influence editors, you need to understand, especially in science publishing, how they track their scientists. And clearly Twitter is a very good way. It's been known that in science scholarly publishing circle, Twitter has got quite a success story. But obviously you can never single out one over the others, in that you always constantly need to push through multiple channels. And that multi-channel or sometimes omni-channel, if you want to include them systematically all the time in all your campaign, is really the way the industry is going.
So this is a clarification to the question of, does SciencePOD create and publish their own content? So the clarification is, apart from the content from other parties, does SciencePOD create its own content? So are you a publisher yourself?
We are more an interface between people who need content and people who can create content. So we only create content when someone needs us to do it. Of course, we do a little bit of content of our own just to make ourselves known. We have a blog, and I would invite you to consult that blog, but also occasionally we do video or podcast interviews.
Then there's another question also on distribution. How do we share the articles? Do we use LinkedIn or any other social media? And is SciencePOD, I guess, involved at all?
Yeah, LinkedIn is, it's only good when you're in a more B2B. I don't think that many scientists are using LinkedIn. It really depends who you're trying to target. If it's professionals of a more non-scientist, kind of business professional, IP, policymakers and so on, yes, it's a good way. But if it's other kind of audiences, you need to vary and you need to test what works for your particular audience. I think Twitter is always a winner in my view, but it's very time intensive. So it requires a certain amount of investment that may not be suited if you don't have the manpower to really look after it.
I think to clarify too, maybe the question could also be referring to if SciencePOD themselves, if SciencePOD is a distributor of content as well, or do we just provide advice on how to distribute content?
No, that's a very good question. So SciencePOD has some distribution channels, such as our own social media network, and also a partnership with the likes of this Alpha Galileo to target the media, but we're actually in the process of multiplying the partnership so that we offer people who use our platform options as to where they want to distribute. We're hoping to do paid distribution, targeted paid distribution towards scientific circles in the near future, and we are in discussion with a number of organizations to try and do this distribution. With people who are very good at distribution. I think we're good at content, we just want to partner with the best when it comes to distribution.
Yeah, and I think somewhat related, is it also possible to get hourly advice? And if so, what does it cost?
I think at this point, the best thing is to send us an email, and we'd be very happy to assist you. Yes.
Wonderful. And one last question, because I don't see any more coming through. Or actually, no, we do have a few. Are we enriching the content, or are you enriching the metadata of the publisher's content?
So this is a really important discussion. We have very basic metadata, but that's for a particular reason. It's because every single one of our publishing clients has a different schema when it comes to metadata. So if they want us to format the content alongside this particular schema, we can certainly do it. But this is, at this point in time, there's so much diversity out there that most of the time the publishers find it quicker to just apply their normal processes when it comes to metadata. But this is something we care a lot about. We care about a lot.
Yeah, of course. How do you know a post on Twitter is a success? Clicks, impressions, shares, likes?
All of the above, I suppose.
Yeah, I can answer that too a bit. I think it has to do with what your goal is. So if your goal is reach, or if your goal is engagement, you're looking at maybe different metrics there. Shares, I think, would indicate engagement, and likes would indicate reach, and clicks would indicate from a KPI perspective like a conversion. So you're reaching your goal of converting someone to a click. So yeah, I would answer it that way.
And I guess the bigger discussion here is the way marketeers are being judged. They're being judged through these KPIs, and there's a bit of a tendency to become a slave to these KPIs and not see the wood from the tree, as one says. So I guess it's up to marketeers as well to try and find other ways of measuring success, not just through KPIs and by the overall evolution over time, having maybe a year-on-year comparison and things like that, which are much more long-term. And I know this might not go down very well with with some of you, but it's very clear online that the perception that people have of you will evolve all the time. And if you put in place systems to try and capture the sentiment of people towards your brand and your presence online, there could be softer factors, not just the hard analytics numbers. And I think that's how you forge your way to success, is by establishing yourself online, your digital presence. And this is even more important now that we can't meet physically. You really need to invest a lot more time and effort in establishing your physical presence. And you can only do that through planning, through making sure you express the message through multiple channels, and making sure you're everywhere that your target audience turns online.
Yeah, I would say one other thing I would add to that is the whole concept of evergreen content, or reusing your content. So not just repurposing, as you mentioned, but that one piece of content you can retweet or put on Twitter again as evergreen content a month later, 2 months later, and you'll reach a totally different audience. So it's also looking at that aggregate effect of your content when it turns into more evergreen content.
Absolutely. Any more questions?
I think that's it. Yes, we've covered everybody's questions so far.
Excellent. So thank you very, very much for attending. We're delighted that the attendance has been pretty high for this first webinar, and we'll be planning to organize many more between now and the end of the year.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.